All right, Mike, I messed up.
We need our kank kank.
And I used the wrong countdown. I used the wrong
Kank kank.
countdown video.
Kank kank. There you go. You have to do that, Steve. We have to rendering ourselves now.
I still don't know how Jamar does that. It's here somewhere. I haven't figured it out. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Pencil to Pencil. My name is Steve Conley. I'm a cartoonist and the creator of the webcomic series The Middle Age, which you can read at middleagecomic.com. I would be remiss, I believe is the phrase, if I did not introduce my co-host, the Tower of Power, the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour, the magnificent, the magnanimous, the marvelous maestro of mark making, Mike Manley.
Oh, wow. I sometimes might be a little bit sour, but you can't taste the sweet without the sour.
There you go. There you go. Our
Hello,
normal
everyone.
our normal third co-host, JAMAR Nicholas, is not here. He is on assignment, attempting to please the masses by producing the next volume of Leon. What do you got there? Oh, is that a postcard?
This is actually Jamar gave this to me. It is a little sketchbook that Scholastic put out that has, like, on the cover,
Holy cow,
with all the other characters, and it's a nice little sketchbook.
That is some fine company to be in there.
Yeah. Oh, and there's the back cover.
Holy cow, that's marvelous. That's fantastic. Congratulations,
so
Jamar.
When he does like a store appearance or something, they have all kinds of things to give to kids.
I can only see it briefly. It looked like there was Dogman on there, and
there's Dogman, Bone. I think it was the Babysitters Club. Dogman.
Oh, Raina Telgemeier got Smile on there. Oh, that's amazing. Amazing.
Yeah. So, he's in our buddy Jamar's in great company. And I actually used this the other night. There's actually more inside too.
Oh, that's fantastic.
But I actually used this the other night. I was after I work, I was relaxing, and I was watching The Lonely Man on Amazon, which is an old movie with Jack Palance. And I love watching old black and white movies because I think they relate to comics because we look at them in black and white. We plan them in black and white, and color may or may not come later. But I love the classic Hollywood movie making because everything is, like we were talking previous weeks, everything is designed. There's no accidents.
Right.
Like if you're going to get sunlight at a certain angle off a rock to cast a shadow, so people like John Ford, they had to scout the location and then plan the time of day. They were going to have the actors. They were going to do this action. The sun was going to do something, right, so it can light the scene in the way that he wants. And there was a lot of, it wasn't that fantastic a film, but there were a lot of really good visuals in it. And so what I did is I had a little pen and I just did little.
Hold on a second, let me give you the screen here.
Little quick sketches.
Oh,
there you go. I did little quick sketches of some of the scenes that I really liked in the film. Like there was one scene there with a bad guy in the foreground, and they did a lot of great black framing, a lot of cool textures and lighting. So whenever I see something like that, I like to try to jot it down in my memory.
That's great.
And I recommend people just, you don't need anything expensive to do things like that. In fact, when I started storyboarding back in the 90s, I really started seriously studying film, or and film language and composition. And I did that quite a bit. And I came up with an assignment when I would teach a storyboarding class, which was called reverse storyboarding, where you would take a film and you would, basically draw the storyboard after the film. And one of the things about a lot of the old Westerns, a lot of the old film noir, when things were done in black and white, they really had to plan where lighting was, where actors were, what they were wearing, white on black upon gray, all that stuff. I mean, you had an entire industry that was set up to make things look good. And when you watch old TV shows like The Twilight Zone, one of the reasons why they look so good is the fact that they had to design that stuff to look good on a screen that was on old TVs was really small, right? So they wanted things to read, and that is a great way to study how to make interesting compositions. If you see something, draw it. If you see something and it strikes you, I mean, those are not like beautiful Norman Rockwell sketches, but they go into my brain.
Right.
Later on, I can pull them out. I can pull that information out. It helps me solve a problem later on.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, you said that this week you got something we talked about a few weeks ago, replacement pencils, new pencils.
Right. So what was it, like 2 weeks ago, maybe? Everybody was like, "Oh my God, color erase pencils are like they're not making them anymore." And that was like for a whole week. That was like the brush fire, at least on my feed, because my feed is mostly artists, and just about everybody I know uses one color, or red, or the old non-photo blue, or the light blue. I think Ron Sutton uses a green, but the news came that they were not going to be selling them in singles, or you wouldn't be able to just get like a dozen red. And so I went immediately bought up a big batch of stuff. But then I saw, while I was looking, because I searched like, Dick Blick, Jerry's Artorama, and I usually always go to Amazon, because Amazon not only has Amazon stock, but sometimes they get stock from other people, right?
Sure.
And then I came across this brand called Zanmei, ZHANMAI. And they look like color erase pencils, right? They really look like they have the eraser, and pretty. So I ordered a couple dozen, and I figured, well, if they're not great for, the main thing for us as cartoonists is that when you pencil it and you erase the pencil, or you ink over the pencil, you don't want the ink to be too waxy because it resists the ink. Or if you erase it, it actually pulls the ink off, which is more of a problem if you ink with markers than if you ink with a regular nib or a brush. Nib puts down more ink on the paper. But I know in the past, one of the things that I faced was if I used and I've seen this happen with students, you use a regular Prismacolor light blue pencil. Has a very waxy base to it.
Yeah, feels like a crayon.
Right. And then when you go over it with ink and then you erase your pencils, it tends to pull up the ink, especially with the markers. And Pigma was really bad there for a while. I don't know if there was just a bad batch of Pigma, but one of the things is you ink something and you go, like, once you erase it, you have to go back and re-ink it. So again, these are all the kind of things you face when especially you're on deadline. Okay, I'm done. I'm going to erase it and go and scan it and send it in. And like, oh no, I'm going to have to ink this thing twice now.
And so far, you like the Zanmei?
So far, I have liked them. Again, what might work for me may not necessarily work for somebody else.
Sure.
Some people like a 5H, a real hard lead, I remember when I was inking Alpha Flight back in the 80s, the artist John Calumet, he liked a really hard pencil, and his pencils were not very dark. Of course, everything was better, the paper and everything, but one of the things about somebody like Gene Colan, fantastic artist, but he was very, he put down a lot of lead.
Right.
So if you're Tom Palmer and you're inking it with a pen, not a problem. But if you were, or a brush, good ink, you're not a problem. But if you were inking with a marker, I imagine that would create a problem when you went to erase it. So, and some people are heavy-handed. Like some people just have like a Hulk hand, what I call it. You know, some people are very, very light. You know,
Right.
and they
Sure.
like a very light lead. So, these are all the kind of things that you deal with. You know, being an inker, or working, in comics or animation. So most people in animation love the color erase. So I would say, go buy yourself a dozen, right? Go buy ZHANMAI on Amazon. I did not find them anywhere else. So, but I liked them, and
That's great.
it's always good to share the wealth, the knowledge. If you find a good pen or a good brush, we're always
Oh yeah.
talking
Yeah.
about.
Because then then you have to stock up before they stop making them, or they change the formula, or yeah. Yeah, always buying too many of a thing because I don't want to run out of cartridges, or
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
still use those Pentel brush pens for everything.
I used to love the. I don't even have one anymore, but I used to love. Rapidograph made these disposable rapidograph. They were called rapido liners. So usually with a rapidograph, you have to take the tip off, take the little reservoir off, clean your tip of your thing, and clean the thing, and put it. It was always like a process. And if you drop it, you bend the needle. Oh, you might be sitting there for 15, 20 minutes or more cleaning the pen.
Right. Sure.
But the repeater liners were like a rapidograph. You got a holder, just like you get with a Copic, and you just pop the new one in, and it had you could get the same pen sizes as you could with a regular rapidograph. I love those things. I use them all the time. Then stop making them. You can still buy a rapidograph, which are way more expensive now than they used to be.
Sure.
So something you always face.
I'm happy to use the Apple Pencil. I know. I've been doing a lot more with a lot more papers, tone sketches and things like that. Like it's all like brush pen and gel pens and things like that. Silly.
Yeah, I really like what you're doing there. If you get a nice toned paper.
Yeah, it's silly, but it's we got Shelly says Pictograph pens, hated those in graphic art class. That's how I felt. I felt like I always had to dismantle them and get as ink on as many parts of myself as possible.
Oh yeah, yeah. I don't know. Where is it? I have actually on my hand. It's fading. You can't really see it, but see that there's a little spot there that I got inking myself like in a prison, where the rapidograph fell and went straight into my hand and made this little dot. And it's been there ever since I was a teenager. So that's my jailhouse tattoo.
Your tattoo. That's
my art class tattoo. Just one. That's all you needed. But yeah, I still have my rapidographs, but I haven't. There's one. I haven't used it in years just because I got tired of the maintenance, and markers have gotten so much better.
Yeah. Yeah. I was using that as my primary drawing tool, but then once I got the hang of a brush, I was like, I didn't want to use a rapidograph anymore. I like that, the thick and thin line. I just love the heck out of that. This week, I want to jump in. I don't think I mentioned this week's topic. You might have seen it when you tuned in, but if you're catching us now, you just walked in off the street. This week, we're talking about figure construction. Mike Manley, the maestro of mark making, will wait. What's your artist injury? Like the industry? I don't have any artists. I don't have any injuries. I haven't stressed myself.
You don't have the divot? Do you have the divot in your finger?
I have that, and I have the palm, the callus from using a mouse for so long with mouse pads. So I've got this kind of extra heel here, and then I've got the.
That's where your dew claw is, Steve.
And then I do have that kind of the pool bridge, that kind of, remember, like a pool hole bridge. You've got that under your finger, that kind of little divot. Yeah.
Somebody was doing that on Facebook last week. I think people were posting pictures of their divots.
Nice. Fantastic. This week has been crazy for me. I've been preparing another Kickstarter. I gave myself an extra week to launch it. It's more for the gaming side of my little creative career and my illustrative career. But it's going to launch
your empire. You're slowly taking over.
My continuing effort not to grow up or get a real job. It will launch next Wednesday, and but so far that's taking up all my time. It's But
what are some of the things that you have to?
Well, before it launches, figuring out the pricing, making sure you got tiers that make sense, that explain things to a person walking in off the street who doesn't know who I am, who's not familiar with. Basically, you want to make it as simple as possible for people to understand what they're getting, and that's kind of the part I'm doing. I'm also creating more illustrations. I want to show more of what they're getting. There's kind of that Will Eisner line about taking, he didn't feel he was a particularly great writer or a particularly great artist, but together that combination kind of gave him his alchemy. And I feel like that's definitely in the gaming side of things, where I also have, I might not be the best game theorist or the best artist, but together it synergizes in a way. And so I want to show as much of the artwork as possible. People, this all chatter is all about divot picks now. It's going to get weird.
Don't send me your divot picks.
So it's that, and it's so preparing the trailer, setting up your prices. The campaign page has been approved for a while, but at some point there'll be an episode where I can just talk about Kickstarter tips I've come across and things I've put together, and how I approach my campaigns, and why I start them on Tuesdays or Wednesdays, and when I start them and when I end them, and how I come up with my pricing and the things I think work.
I took a workshop once at I think it was at a LuxCon about the Kickstarter, and the fellow related. There were a couple of people on the panel. One guy related how he made, he had fairly good sales, but there were things that he did not plan for, like
right.
Insurance for shipping. Right. And then his stuff got messed up, and and then he also got some little tchotchke to ship, as one of the extras, and that alone ended up costing him so much money.
Sure.
To send. So by the time, basically he made no money, I think, is what it turned out. It's like he made money, but it cost him so much by getting things reprinted, stuff was damaged, all those kinds of things that you didn't really think about.
Yeah, there's currently a campaign of someone who made little stuffed owl bears. Owl bears are this kind of monster popular in tabletop role-playing games, specifically Dungeons and Dragons. Someone made these little stuffed owl bears, and they did a Kickstarter campaign. It raised $500,000, and the person shared their numbers and how the person walked away with about $7,000.
Wow.
because of all, and that also didn't account for everything. Like there was still additional costs on top of all that. So I think having an episode where we just share some more stories with people who have had Kickstarters of their own, and talk about best practices, things I'd recommend, huge mistakes I've made, things like that. I think stuff that cautionary tales that I think would help whenever anyone's going to do any kind of crowdfunding.
Because that seems to be the way a lot of people are going now, is like, well, why should I go to a publisher? If I can get enough people to support my Kickstarter, I'll make more money. I don't have to worry about the rights. I don't have to worry about, somebody doing something to it that I don't approve of, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I know that there's a lot of, just even making a good video, things like that are important.
And being happier with, or being satisfied with having readers or customers numbering in the tens or hundreds versus tens of thousands, going through the traditional publishing route. You're talking about a much larger scale and having a larger possible impact. Whereas everything about crowdfunding is often much smaller and much more boutique. And if you're happy with that, I'm very happy with it. My last Kickstarter had 450 supporters, and that's plenty for me. I was very happy with it. So hopefully the next one that'll launch on Wednesday, we'll talk about it next week, maybe a little bit.
And you'll have 4,001.
I just want, no, I want 1,000. I want 1,000 supporters for my next Kickstarter campaign. But,
all right, you guys, you heard it.
More important than that, though.
Get those credit cards out.
More important than that, I want us to have 1,000 subscribers here on YouTube. JAMAR Nicholas is on assignment for a few more weeks, and I would love when he gets back for us to have 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. So if you go to youtube.com/pencil and hit the subscribe button, tell your friends. Even if you have to stop watching this video for any reason, just put it on mute, walk away, let it run to the end. We really want to get those numbers up so that we have 1,000 by the time JAMAR comes back. I think it'd be an awesome surprise.
Yes. And I noticed that today some people were sharing it on Instagram. So that's another thing that you can do to help us, is when I put up my story or my notice, share it to your friends. There's so much going on and flying on the internet, social media, that it's, you don't catch everything. Sometimes you find out something like 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, or you go like, how did I never know about this person doing this?
Right. And I also want to figure out a way to showcase the stuff everyone's out there, everyone in this community is doing. We need to brainstorm, but I don't want to digress any further. We have a fantastic topic tonight. I'm very excited. Let me put the graphic up again. We've got, I think people can hear us while this is on the screen. Better figures. So Mike, I think you have a cheat sheet for us and can walk us through how to make our figures better.
Right. I do. So tonight's episode, when I was thinking about what would be a good, like a perennial, something that I know from teaching for like 20 years now, or I guess probably over 20 years now, there are certain things that I see over and over and over and over again with young artists. And the way I teach is not only will I will have a lecture, but I would always go over everybody's drawings, usually with tracing paper, so that if there was something off with a figure and I can work on the figure, then the person actually sees and can take away the tracing paper to help make their, to improve their work. And as I'm always saying, everybody has good habits in the beginning and bad habits in the beginning. And if you're going to be an artist who is making your living as a commercial artist working for Marvel or DC or Disney or Wizards of the Coast, whoever you want to work for. One of the main things you need to have is a reliable way of working and a reliable skill set, a reliable recipe, right? And I know a lot of times people sort of dislike that term, formula or recipe, but I find that it really is something as simple as that. And that doesn't mean that it has to be formulaic or bad, but there are certain common problems that I see with young artists, even like medium artists, people that have been working
not so young artists.
not so young artists. And one of the main things I see is sort of weak construction or the fundamentals when you start building your figures. And so you can bring up the screen now. So drawing is always a challenge. No matter what job, there's nothing that's ever really easy if you're doing a good job. But to me, it's always exciting, and the possibilities really are endless. I mean, I just watched Black Panther the other day, and I was thinking, like, all those hundreds of people that worked on that film. But the original architect was a guy with a number 2 pencil. Somebody like Jack Kirby could sit down with a pencil in his imagination and world build in a way in a comic book that in a film you literally need, hundreds and hundreds of people.
I always love that about that Fantastic Four movie, Rise of the Silver Surfer, where they're like, Kirby created Galactus, and we're like, okay, that's Galactus. He's badass. That's awesome. And the filmmakers were like, we give up. We can't do it.
Right. Here's a shadow of something,
Yeah. All that money and all that CGI, and you couldn't do what Jack Kirby did.
Right. Exactly. I mean, that was sort of the disappointing thing with the Eternals. It's like I was thinking, oh, okay, we're gonna get a little Kirby, and then no. But so construction, the way you build your figures is very important, and especially to make characters look the same. Now, in comics, we kind of get a little bit more leeway with exaggeration and stylization and little differences.
Masks.
Right. But if you're working in animation, which I have, it's basically supposed to look like one person did the whole thing. You're not supposed to be able to say, well, this person drew this person drew this scene, this person drew this scene. Although, again, there are literally dozens or hundreds of people working on some of the cartoons. And so one of the questions I'm often asked by young artists is, how do you make your character look the same? Right? And part of that is how you construct your character from the very beginning. And so there's certain ways of starting out that will give you more predictable, more dependable. I guess that's the other thing is that your workflow, your process really needs to be dependable. If you're going to work in mainstream comics, you basically had to be able to produce 1, 2, 3, 4 pages a day. Now the great guys, like Kirby and Buscema and Kane, those guys could do 4 or 5 pages a day. I mean, they were just inhuman in that way. But even if you were ever working on a monthly book, or you're working on a comic strip, and in my case, there's a Judge Parker 365 days a year, you have to be able to be consistent, and you need your process to be predictable. That also gives you confidence. Your speed comes from confidence. If you sit down and you feel, even though this might be a complex situation or page to draw or character or setup, but you feel confident in that you know how to draw a head, you know how to build a figure. It's not like, oh, well, I really don't know how to draw a figure very well. And every time I draw the figure, it's a little bit different, right? Now that might work in, like a fine art situation,
right,
where you want this chaos and unpredictability to come into play. And I definitely did that in art school, and there was a lot of talk about that process in art school, but you cannot do that in comics. You cannot do that in animation. You cannot do that, especially in animation where you're working on the show and there's other people in the assembly line, the chain. So I thought about tonight, and I thought, well, there are some real basic tips.
Ooh, excellent.
Right. Some basic tips and basic approaches. And again, this is something that I didn't necessarily think about myself really until I started teaching. Until I really started teaching, I was just doing my own approach. Now, I am self-taught when it comes to comics, so I had to be sort of very analytical, and I will show you some, people that I learned from. But when you start teaching, the benefit of teaching is you have to approach the same subject from many different angles, because every student is at a different ability, a different stage. So you are dealing with, how do you construct a figure? How do you draw an environment? All those, how do you do foreshortening? All these problems that we encounter as artists, you encounter over and over and over and over again with students. And so I thought the main thing would be to point out some of the things I see that are very common, and I think actually are very sort of easily dealt with. And so don't start drawing the figure with the head. Right now, I would observe people drawing, and very often they wouldn't rough out the whole body. They would just start drawing like, with the head, and then the drawing would kind of grow, like a mushroom. It would just kind of spread out. Then you get an arm or whatever. Now, again, as you and I were talking before the podcast, there are some people who naturally have that way of judging, and they have this very organic process that allows them to start with the head and build out from there, and everything kind of comes out, right?
Right.
Or someone like Kim Jung-gi, who trained himself specifically, even if he already had maybe a little bit of a better edge for that, he specifically trained himself. I actually watched him, met him once, San Diego, and I watched him draw. And if you watched him draw, you could see him thinking. It just wasn't like I just put the line down and like blah, 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 I scribble all over. He was actually thinking. So he was drawing in his head, visualizing in his head, and planning where his pen was going to go. Now, most people don't really work that way.
Right.
So I found that you don't start with drawing the head, because what you're doing is you're drawing like a little object. You're not considering the whole of the figure. You're considering a very small part of the figure. All right. Also, the gesture of the figure, or as my professor used to say, the border of the form. So the form of the figure has a border from the arms to the legs to the head. The space that it occupies is
like a silhouette.
yeah, right. And then one of the main things is having a center line on your figure, center line on the head, center line for the eyes, center line down the along the line of action, bisecting the chest, bisecting, the torso, bisecting the face. That's very, very important, because one of the things that happens with some people is that, and some more than others, is there might be a slight distortion and lean to a drawing. And if you don't have the center line, it's easy for the eyes to really start being uneven,
right?
And for things to float. Then there's the we'll come back to this when I do my little drawing demo. Is what I call the coat hanger. So if you take the trapezius, the collarbone, and the neck, that's sort of like a diamond shape with the neck coming out of that. The angle of that, which I will show you later, really starts you off immediately thinking about form. The angle of the nose. Are you looking down? Are you looking up? With the angle of the nose, how much of the bridge of the nose you see as opposed to the bottom of the nose. That has a lot to do with considering the position or the tilt of the head.
Sure.
And then drawing through your forms. If you're drawing the body, draw through the body. If you're drawing if you're looking at the character from the right side, you draw that left arm. You draw through, just like your Superman when you have like X-ray vision.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That, again, you're thinking like a sculptor. You're thinking about the volume. You're considering the volume, gesture, volume, landmarks, then the detail. And you build the character that way. And one of the things I was really thinking about, well, how did that process really come about? And I think mostly it came about from, in the way that we sort of think of it today, really came from animation, because especially Disney, Disney sort of perfected a lot of things, 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 years ago. Things like how to construct a figure, how to take a little simple figure and move a figure around. And if you look at Steamboat Willie as opposed to Mickey Mouse 10 years later, the amount of volumetric drawing and being able to turn the figure in space is astonishing. And that way of thinking like a sculptor is something that Disney said, and something that they really perfected that way, so that you can draw something simply, but you have to build it to get simple. It's not, and people always think that simple is easy, but actually simple is actually very hard. And you're always relating one side of the body to the other, right? When you're comparing one side of the body to the other. Oh, where is this knee in comparison to that knee? Where is this elbow in comparison to that elbow? Very often I'll see, something that'll stand out to me right away is, you'll have a figure foreshortened or at an angle, and one arm is way too short. If you move that arm over to the other side, you go, wait a minute, oh, that elbow is way short, right? And then this is my little checklist. Now, again, I'll put these all up on the my blog, but you basically have what I call landmarks. All right. So you have the big forms of the head, torso, and pelvis, and each of those, major components or landmarks. For the head, you have the eye line, the nose, and the targus. Now, the targus is that little nodule in your ear, right? Now, that nodule in your ear sort of bisects the head in half and lines up with the nose. So if you have the nose and you have the eye line, you already start feeling the volume of the head. And so the targus is something that's very important. And one of the things that I will say is that, there's a wealth of information now and how to on the internet, and you will eventually come up with a process made up of all these other processes that you study that work for you, right? So this is my process that I developed from studying artists that I liked and working, and you find that there's a way of working, like I said, that leads to more consistent results. And that's a real big help as a cartoonist or someone working in animation, where you have to do things, over and over again and make things look consistent. So, the hand landmarks of the head, the pit of the neck, you have the torso, the collarbone, the spine, the scapula, the pectoral, the sternum, the thoracic arch, which is your rib cage, your elbows, wrists, hips, knees, ankles, right? And you're always dealing with perspective and always dealing with some form of foreshortening. Even if you're looking straight on at somebody, there's actually foreshortening from the tip of their nose to the bridge of their nose. The head is not flat. There are planes on the head. So you're always dealing with the form and form turning. And in comics, we're always drawing people in perspective, figures flying, a real standard pose you see in animation, as you'll see tonight, is the 3/4 view. And if you're drawing a 3/4 view, you get some of the front of the figure and some of the side, or some of the back of the figure and some of the side. And most cartoon characters are designed to look good in that viewpoint, whether it's the Warner Brothers cartoons, or especially anything, say, from, Rough and Ready and the Flintstones, Hanna-Barbera onward, Simpsons, Family Guy, what we call like the stamp style shows, where you sort of have the figure standing there and then you just animate the mouth or something.
Right.
And then the last little bit here before we move on is your home gym. All right. Which means sketchbooks or workbooks. And I always recommend that people have several sketchbooks and several workbooks, and then you break down your work, your study into men and women, hands, the torso. You can have as many sketchbooks as you want, but you have these books for study. Not necessarily to make beautiful drawings, but to make drawings, to put information into your head. Because comics and animation are drawing on stored information. It's drawing on demand. It's not like going out and painting a landscape or even painting a figure that's in front of you, where what you're doing is making choices, right? The information is provided to you, and then you make choices. When you're drawing a comic page, you have to pull everything up. You have to pull up how to build a figure, how to put the figure in space.
Right. And if you haven't solved that problem before in your little sketchbook, you're solving it for the first time on the page, which not the best time.
Well, there's the first 10 years of anybody's career is really the building of your career, the building of your muscles, of your thinking. And as I'm always saying to younger artists, the sooner you can kind of get the canon of proportion down, you learn your anatomy, you learn drapery, you learn that stuff, then you learn perspective. Like one of the biggest ones is learning perspective. Once you learn it, then it's a tool, and it's not something like, oh, now I have to again figure out this problem.
Right.
Like everything stops, and then I have to figure out this problem. So those were those. Recommend that you get sketchbooks in your work. Now, here's Gil Kane, who was a structuralist. He was a stylist and a structuralist, where was very much into having studied George Bridgman. And he really, when I was a younger artist, one of the things I liked about his work is it was very consistent, and I could actually see the construction. And so he really had a formula here. And what I love, there's a million of these things on the internet, a million of these things, where you can see him having gone in, and you can really see how he's building his figures. He's constructing the figure.
Yeah, I love that.
Right. And I learned so much in the beginning from him.
Yeah, those hands, everything about that. The line he has from the edge of the eyes in that center panel, the leading, like, to kind of defining the top plane of the cheekbone.
Right. Right. And he really had that consistent formulation of construction that, again, like I was saying, like that angle of the nose really helps set the planes. So you can tell a lot, and we'll see as we go through, looking even at animation stuff where you have to simplify. You can't do as much. The angle of the nose, like here, it tells you a lot about what the angle of the eyebrow is going to be. It's like they work together so well. Here's another great page. He was great at also throwing those figures in space. He was really good at doing that.
That's beautiful.
So foreshortening and perspective. And he's a guy who did what I call the fly around. So he's like, you're looking up at the characters in this panel. You're looking down at the characters in the next panel. You're looking back up. And he loved these long horizontal panels. Great construction. And again, he was a real key artist to me for learning how to consistently build your characters. Now, there might have been other artists that I liked as much, and if not more in some ways, like John Buscema or Neil Adams, and then, or later on, like Wally Wood or, Al Williamson, people like that, or, Alex Raymond. But for doing superheroes and really constructing your figure, through studying him, I was better able to understand some of the concepts that George Bridgman expressed in his figure drawing books.
Sure.
And this again relates to that Kirby saying, one man can be a school for another. Gil Kane was a school for me. And through Gil Kane, I was able to understand George Bridgman better. And I could see how he used George Bridgman's theories, and then he made him his own. Here's another. This is a great page. So, you know, you're always dealing with perspective. And here's the coat hanger. This is what I call the coat hanger,
Mm-hmm.
right? Here's the coat hanger, right? That tells you a lot about what the angle of the torso was going to be, right? That coat hanger tells you a lot about that. It's really pretty. It's one of the things that I learned, especially having to draw characters consistently over and over again, and having to have them, you know, with superheroes being very dynamic. And you see the same thing with this beautiful Garcia Lopez drawing, right? You can really feel the volumes. You can really see that.
That's beautiful.
If you draw through, and you can see him drawing through, you can see him feeling the volumes, very sculptural, right? Oh, and always very appealing, always very, very appealing, right? Because she's supposed to be Wonder Woman. She's supposed to be, you know, sexy Amazonian woman, right? And you can see like the collarbones are not just barely hinted at, but he's thinking. You can see that he's feeling. You can see he was actually drawing something else there. I love drawings like this. And if you study drawings like this, you actually learn more about drawing than if you actually study a finished drawing.
It's beautiful.
Two more. Again, great, clear construction. And you can see like there's nothing, you know, how it's there, but it isn't there. All what he's using and what he's not using or not showing. He's using it but not showing. Here's another page.
Mm.
You can really feel the construction and the volumes. You really feel the construction and the volumes. And he's much more of a naturalistic artist than, let's say, Gil Kane. But you feel the same principles at work. They're very volumetric. You really feel the center line. You know, you can see the center line on that figure. And so in animation, the first show I worked on was Superman. And one of the things you come to learn about animation is that all these principles, all the anatomy that I'm talking about is there, but it has to be sort of designed in a way that works so that hundreds of people, you know, can actually do this character. And not everybody, this is the one thing about animation, is that not everybody is at the same skill level. Like some people are really good at the figure and they know the anatomy, and some don't know it as much, and so it's really compartmentalized. You have people that do rough drawings, you have lead animators, assistant animators, and then you have people who just do cleanup, who just go in and put it on model, as they say. So now this is a very simple figure. You see the thoracic arch, see the center line. By the time he was working on these shows, Bruce had come up with the idea of actually simplifying the arm construction. So you don't see the deltoid and the bicep. And so he had this real straight against the curves thing going on, and he just emphasized it even more. But you still see the same construction ideas in Gil Kane. Right? Still see the same construction ideas there. But in animation, you have to stylize it and make it very consistent so that, again, lots of people working on this thing can follow it and make it look consistent. And so Superman is much more volumetric. You know, you can feel the volumes. You actually see the volumes there. When I worked on Samurai Jack, he was much more of a pushed design, and you can still see the same principles, but he's not volumetric in the same way. He's a design. It's much more of a flat design.
Right.
And when he would jump at you, it was still flat. It's still a very flat shape, and you cheat it by adding these little ovals, but it's still very much a flat shape. Never saw the top of Jack's head, right? Because, you know, but lots of construction for a different style of drawing. And then going back to Disney, I think these drawings relate very much to what Garcia Lopez was doing. These are by Mark Davis, who's one of the 9 Old Men, was just a fantastic draftsman. But you can feel the volume.
Right.
You can see he had the little line there to help him put the eyes in the right spot. And these are very sculptural drawings. So here's a guy who's done a million drawings. Million drawings. And what is part of his repertoire that he uses over and over again? Center line. Right? Center line. You can even see those center line there a little bit in her body. Right? And you can really feel him relating the flow. Another great drawing. You can see the underdrawing there.
That's great.
And then these great Captain Hook drawing. I love this because you can actually see that there's the figure. You can see both of their figures so well underneath that rough animation drawing. These are the kind of drawings, like I said, that you can really learn from. I know people love finish, and finish is important, but the construction and how you put together a figure is the primary thing that everything else hangs on. You know, and so you can see, even though we don't see that left leg, he drew that left leg in there. He has to draw it in there to get the right leg in there. And you can feel the volume of that figure. And so now I was going to show some anime stuff because so many young artists are influenced by anime. And it is a style of drawing, but one of the things that I see is if you do something that is stylized and you understand it's stylized, then your drawing is informed. But if you pick up just like a habit from something that's stylized, you incorporate maybe something that doesn't necessarily work or creates other problems in your drawing. And one of the things about these drawings is that there's parts of them that are very flat and parts of them that are suddenly volumetric. And one of the things I was going to point out really is I see a lot of sort of the standard face you see a lot of people draw as the anime face. And it's very cartoony, and that's fine. But one of the things you notice is that you're not really drawing the volumes of the head very much, right? In other words, you're not drawing like that Gil Kane shot where you're looking up, right?
Right.
Or you're really looking down. The head is essentially sort of a flat disc or sort of like a almond shape. And you're mainly led to think of it being at an angle by maybe that hair or the angle of the nose. Like this goes, okay, you're looking up. Here you're looking straight on. Here you're looking down. But is that not a lot of difference between this shape and this shape?
No, that was a cheat I always used, which early on was placement of the ears to indicate height. Like you were talking about, like the lower the ears, the high, the head was looking up. Higher the ears, the head was looking down.
Right. Now, I mean, that is true. If you look up, your ears are lower because your head is tilted back, right? But even when he's not looking up, his ears are lower.
Yeah, they're pretty low on this guy, yeah.
Right, yeah, right. And so one of the things about anime is that people absorb these isms without really thinking about the construction of what's going on.
Right.
And so I would see a lot of errors in construction. What helps you on this is this hat. The volume of the hat does more to give volume to that head than anything, right? And again, I have nothing against cartoony stuff. I like cartoony stuff, but one of the things I see is that people come up with these ways of drawing that become incorporated into their repertoire without them really understanding the good sort of like canon of construction. Because if you can construct a head well, then you can actually construct a stylized head even better. Like even where the neck goes in. This is something I see a lot of people where the neck goes in. Now this guy, he has a really super stylized figure, or even this one, like his head seems to me, it's very stylized, very small, but there's a lot of things in here where I feel like suddenly it's not very volumetric. It's not very, I don't feel the form coming forward as much. Like this seems flat, where if the leg was coming forward, I would feel it would be more of a volume. Like I feel the volume there, but not necessarily the volume there. Now, again, part of this is because anime is very stylized, and they're stylizing it to use the minimum amount of animation. And therefore, like I don't actually even feel like this is the same head on the same girl. That sort of weird construction of the neck. Again, you may like that, and that might be fine. But you have to understand how real neck works. Because if you just build everybody's sort of like a Frankenstein. I was a Frankenstein, right? I would study Gil Kane or Neil Adams or whatever. And in the beginning, everybody's a sort of a Frankenstein of your likes. And there's things that are good about that, and there's things that are bad about that. And the bad thing about that is that as you go on as an artist and you have to produce a variety of work, and you also face different drawing, maybe more complex drawing challenges. It's important to understand what a real head looks like. A real head, the ear is not down like a gland on the neck.
Yeah, the top left and right kind of look like masks.
Well, I think there's a very mask-like quality to most of the anime stuff. And again, I like anime. There's stuff I like very much. But a lot of the isms I see a young artist pick up come from stuff like this. And it doesn't help them draw anything else but this. And in your career, you're not going to just draw stuff like that. You're going to have to draw all kinds of different stuff. And it does not necessarily give you tools to help you solve more complex problems, like one of the things I very often see, she's supposed to be a sexy girl, but there's no way she comes even close to that. And Tinkerbell has no boobs. It's the gesture and the curves, the S curves, that make her sexy. Even though, she's sitting in a sexy pose. To me, there's no sexy lines on that drawing. And she has ginormous hands. She's like a NBA basketball player. So here's a drawing that's a little bit sort of in between. It's a little stylized, but it's got a little bit more anatomy than what Bruce was doing. But there's all the landmarks and that sense of volume and construction. And it's not even necessary to have an encyclopedic knowledge of anatomy or correct anatomy, let's say. You can have very little anatomy, or you could have a little bit more anatomy, or you could be like somebody like, was it Stephen Platt, or some people are like Bart Sears that are like super about drawing like every muscle.
Right.
But that's not what is, what I'm talking about here is fundamental. This, when you're drawing the simple construction, again, you have your landmarks like, the neck. So here's this line going down, center line. One of the things I would do is that center line, which would flow through the whole figure, basically would give you the border of the form, the length of the form, or the height of the form. And as soon as I do that, you start understanding the angle of the figure. So I'm going to stop this for a second while I get set up to do the other stuff. Are there any questions so far?
We had a couple of comments. Yeah, well, you set that up. What do you think about Eternitine ask on YouTube? What do you think about the Japanese photo pose reference books or photo books in general for reference?
They're fine. I think they're fine. Any photo that you can use that can give you information is good. The one thing about photos, the danger of working with photos, is there's things that you accept in a photo that when you turn that into a drawing look odd, like will look awkward, or won't look right. Like somebody could be bending over in a very folded on form. You accept it because it's a photograph. Right. Okay, yeah, that's what the back looks like. Then you take that lump, you turn that lump into a drawing, and you go, oh, okay, wait a minute.
Yeah,
that looks weird.
I find that even when I'm sculpting figures, I sculpt a lot of I sculpt in Nomad on my iPad, and I'll sculpt a character, and I'll bring that in as basis to use as reference for an illustration. And because the sculpture was designed to work in a 3D space, and I've taken basically a snapshot of it, I still have to do a ton of work to it to make it work as an illustration, because tangents and all the things that look fine in a photograph because you just accept it because you recognize it as a snapshot of reality or a snapshot of a 3D image. As soon as it becomes a drawing, it just implies intent everywhere. And none of that intent was part of it, right? It's like, it has all this baggage that comes with it. And you spend all your time unpacking that before you can turn it into a decent piece of artwork.
There's a great book called Norman Rockwell Behind the Camera. And it shows how he, working with his photographer, spent a lot of time working out the poses so that he could use them. And work from them. He was not, it wasn't just like he projected it and traced it.
Right.
And there's certain angles. He was a beautiful designer. He was a fantastic draftsman and a great painter, but the best thing about him was his ideas and his design and the angles to show things, what to show, the tilt of a head. He really spent a lot of time working with his photographer, choosing the right photo. A bad photo won't help you, right? A bad photo that's poorly lit. Like I had some of those Japanese pose books, and I would say like, oh, they're okay. But I basically found out that in the end, none of those poses worked for me.
Right. Yeah. You spend more time scouring the library looking for the right image for yourself than just drawing one yourself.
Right. Now what I find a tip I got was from the late Charles Santori, who was a very good illustrator. And I met him once, and we were talking about this, and he said what he did is he would draw the figure, then he would shoot a picture, or he would get reference to give him information to finish it. Right. So that what he wasn't limited to was what he photographed.
Right. If you start with your morgue, your reference library, your stock photos, you're limited. You're just limited.
Right. Well, again, it's something that's probably fallen out of practice, because back in the golden age, there was a lot of the stuff that was taught or passed down, where they taught you how to use a photograph. Back in the day, if you were doing something for a ladies' home journal, they would give you the models, or they would give you the pick of the models. They would give you a photographer. You would shoot the stuff. You would go over it. You choose your photos. You do your layout. It was a real process. It wasn't something where it's like, well, I found the scrap. That's the only thing I can use. Okay, And I also learned that from working with L. Williamson, and he actually showed me, and we talked about that before. It's like how to use a photograph and what to use from a photograph. Sometimes you don't use almost anything from the photograph. You might just use a gesture, or you might use a hand, or you might use a part, or you might use the idea.
Right.
But then you've got to come up with the drawing. So what I found is I would have those. I still have them. The Fairburn system, which is a system of books that had all these photographs of all these people standing and drinking coffee and wearing suits, and from all these different angles. They had one on kids. And I bought those when I first started working in comics, thinking like, okay, I'm going to have the picture of the guy going, with a cup of coffee.
Right.
What I found out is that for the way my mind worked, for the kind of pictures that I wanted to do, none of those pictures worked. Right. I was never going to draw something that looked exactly like one of those photos.
Right. And then when you find two images, like you're trying to draw two people sitting there having coffee together, and the camera angle on one is a little higher than the angle on the other one, the person sitting across from them, and everything is off. And you just feel that when you see the illustration. You're like, oh, that doesn't like.
Yeah. No, I'm really good now at being able to photo bash if I have to, or Frankenstein something.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I would say about something like Judge Parker is that I have to draw a lot of real naturalistic things of like people like pouring coffee and doing very subtle, but hard to draw gestures, right? And it's like real people sitting and talking and sitting around a table, everybody's eating. Are you carving? If you're doing an issue of Spider-Man, you really don't ever have to draw that. If I'm drawing an issue of Batman, I really didn't have to draw Bruce Wayne. cutting up his steak, right?
Right.
So you can kind of get away with very often not having to draw any of that stuff.
Right. Sure.
Also, I would never end up using any of those like pose book files, because if I'm going to draw Spider-Man swinging, I can't, there's nothing there I can use. The only thing I will say that they might come in handy for is for people holding guns. Like people holding machine guns,
Sure.
or people firing a gun, holding a hand, firing a gun. That's the stuff that I would think you could probably find. Maybe a little bit about drapery, like crush folds, things like that. But I basically found that although I thought they would be useful, they ended up not being useful. So,
well, we have a question here from James on the YouTubes, who says, "Who was your favorite artist for figure studies?"
That's sort of a complicated question, because there's people. It's like I break it down for comics as opposed to illustration, as opposed to.
Well, how about just for construction?
Well, for construction, like I said in the beginning, was people like Gil Kane. Because he really gave me the key of how to think about how to consistently build a figure. But I did find it to sort of be a limited repertoire after a while. And I mean, that's part of comics, right?
Right.
How many ways you draw somebody flying, right?
Right.
And
it was such every issue he did was basically showing everything he could do. So it wasn't like
right. And there's some artists like him. The formula did have a certain amount of limitations. Like it couldn't, in order for him to probably go beyond that, he would have had to change his approach to how he produced a page. Right. And guys like that from that generation, it's like, once this machine is running, this thing is just going. Right. John Buscema still is at the top for comics. John Buscema and Jack Kirby. Although, like Buscema's on top of Kirby, but with much more naturalism. So for me, the master guy for comic books, still number one is Buscema. Number two would probably be Garcia Lopez. For overall figure drawing, it's people like Albert Dorn. I love the drawings of Dean Cornwell. Again, very construction oriented. You really feel the volume. The same way with Albert Dorn. And then I love Nikolai Feshin, who was a big influence on Albert Dorn. But I find, I would have died and gone to heaven as a teenager, just be able to go on the internet and go, John Buscema, pencil drawing, and then there's just like a bajillion drawing. So for me, for what I'm interested in doing with the figure, the kind of stories that I'm interested in drawing, it's like he's Buscema, Garcia Lopez, to me are like still the top as far as figure construction. There's always an elegance. There's always a power and an elegance in a way the figure is presented. There's nothing awkward. If they want awkward, they draw awkward on purpose to make it awkward.
Right.
Not that it's awkward through poor draftsmanship.
Garcia Lopez was the first cartoonist for me. I think when he took over the Teen Titans, that I noticed that he drew heroes relaxed. He was the first time I saw a character, because heroes were always kind of in that pose, no matter what conversation, they were always like ready for action, ready for the next thing. There was never a moment. There might have been a very stiff, conversation that people were having, but Garcia Lopez, the characters just kind of had a life to them. Everybody just kind of, I don't know. There was more character there. I
think he brought in a little Kobe Whitmore and a little Al Parker and a little Leonard Starr. He brought that aspect into drawing. Yeah, because all the guys I'm talking about, like Garcia Lopez or Buscema, could draw beautiful romance comics and draw beautiful westerns, not just guys punching each other or flying, but they were also able to do that where there's some people like Alex Toth, who I love, but I never really believed his superheroes. His superheroes always look like guys wearing socks, and they didn't feel, it's like you could tell his idea of superheroes was like 1940.
His heart wasn't in it. Yeah.
Yeah. There's some guys, like same way with Gray Morrow, a great draftsman, but when he would draw superheroes, it just didn't feel dynamic, or it didn't feel cool. That's what Adams was able to bring, that sense of realism, but also keep it cool, so you didn't feel like Superman was wearing socks.
Right. Well, I got another question here from Shelley on YouTube, on the YouTubes. And again, it's about 3D reference and Clip Studio's built-in 3D models. How do you feel about those? With a follow-up comment that next month Clip Studio is going to upgrade their models. So do you have any thoughts on those, Mike? Before I didn't want to, I know we want to get to you getting some drawing in, but I want to.
I have no thoughts on them because I don't use them.
Okay.
Right. I don't use any of that stuff. I know people use them. I just sort of feel like I don't know what that would give me. I don't know, I probably have to sit down, figure it out, play around with it. But I still feel that for somehow at this point, for me, where I am as an artist, sometimes figuring stuff out like that wouldn't really end up giving me the feeling that I want.
Right.
Because it's really as much, the construction is about getting the feeling that you want. In the end, all of this is about having the feeling and the effect and the impact in your work that you want.
That's great.
All
right, let's get some drawing in before we get they close the shop down on us, before we get kicked out of our studios. And again, if folks want to find me online, you can check out middleagecomic.com. That's my webcomic, The Middle Age. It's also on Webtoons and Tapas and Go Comics. And Mike, the best place for people to find you is Instagram. Is that where you send them?
Instagram and on Facebook.
And Instagram is Draw Manley.
Right. So let's just do a real sort of like basic, like a basic Hulk character. Now,
and a quick reminder, everyone, if you can, please, if you're over on the YouTubes, please hit that subscribe, ring the bell, light the fires of Gondor, whatever you have to do. Let's try to get these subscription numbers over 1,000 for when Jamar comes back. Are you ready for me to share that, Mike?
Yeah. Okay. So, if I was going to draw a character like the Hulk, right? He's an ape, right? He's an ape. So he's got a lot of weight, right? And so I might start out with just a very simple gesture.
Weird little flicker with the image. I'm not sure if there's anything we do about that, but we'll troubleshoot that before the next stream.
Okay, so you can see that?
Yep.
Okay, so
the screen's flickering, I think, on the stream.
Oh, it's not flickering on here, but it might be
only when you're drawing. I think it might have to do with the pencil and the Bluetooth and all that.
Huh. Okay. So what I would do once I got my gesture, and let's say I liked my gesture, the first thing I would do is I start thinking, okay, now the Hulk he's a big guy. He's got I don't think of him as like the bodybuilder Hulk, like some people draw him with but I think of him like the Kirby Hulk, like a big gorilla. So the first thing I was always saying is like this. If I even just always think of this collarbone, trapezius, and if I do that, the Hulk is the guy who basically has no neck, right? But right there in the middle, then I can add his,
And D. Brad on Facebook asks, do you always draw the line of action, Mike?
always draw the line of action. There is no figure with there's no action. There's no figure without the line of action. To me, that's the spark that animates it, right? So again, just a real general anatomy, you don't have to go in and add all the serration of every muscle, but I just think, okay.
And you don't do that kind of classic two spheres for each shoulder.
No, I think of the gesture, right? And so I'm thinking like, the Hulk is kind of a thick-waisted guy, so I got to try to find the thoracic arch, his belly, and then his pelvis. And he has a relatively small pelvis compared, he's like an ape, he's like bigger up top.
I won't tell him you said that.
Yeah, I don't want the Hulk coming over, crushing me. So I start out with something, and then thinking, okay, that arm is going back. That's where sometimes actually drawing in that volume. And the one thing about these guys like the Hulk or the Thing or anybody, they always have big feet. Big feet.
Let's see if I can move our. Uh-oh, you're applying your own rules. I love it. So what did you see there that you felt like you needed to change?
I just don't like the feeling of the way that leg was going back. I mean, at this stage of the drawing, it's all about the feel. It's more about the feel and the volumes.
And so you're doing this also on the Phantom, and I can see you do this on the Phantom, also on Judge Parker.
I do this on every. This is the way I draw anything. Really, it doesn't really matter about the style. This is the way I draw any. This is the way I build any figure.
That's fantastic. And when you're drawing this, how many levels? Let's say the initial blue drawing is kind of like your I don't know, raw gesture. And now, right now, what would you call this stage? It doesn't feel quite like
Stage
pencil.
one. Stage one refinement. I mean, it's a little bit. I have to say, you know, I'm still drawing digitally. Is still sometimes a struggle for me because I'm so used to drawing on paper. And one of the things about drawing on paper, all right, so I'm drawing this with my hand. I'm just getting hand gesture. But if I was drawing this, I'm going to stop this for a second. If I was drawing this on paper, I would be drawing more with my
Right.
and I would be feeling it more. One of the things that's always a struggle with drawing on the screen is that when you're drawing, I don't feel, doesn't feel
Right.
the same, right? It doesn't feel the same to me. Right.
I feel the toughest thing for me is the sense of scale, the sense of where I am on the page, the sense of true, not proportions, but and not even scale within the drawing, not contextually within the story itself, but scale of the paper, scale of the page, of the strip. Like, where am I in that context? Because I just get, into the weeds of it.
Right.
This is fascinating. I love watching this because when I'm drawing the Middle Age, the character's anatomy is so wonky. He's got this a tabard that drapes in front of him. He's got this sort of tunic surcoat that's underneath the tabard that creates kind of a kilt or skirt around his pelvis, because his pelvis is just ridiculous. It's anti-anatomical. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. His legs are too far apart. It gives him a very distinct silhouette for his design. It makes it easy to pick him out of a crowd at a small size.
Right.
But it's nonsense. I love seeing this because it's like you are pushing the figure very far, and I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
but holding it
together. I might be thinking also once I get to this point, I might be thinking even well, how is the lighting going to strike him, right?
Yeah.
All right. So now, this is very bold for something, again, digital, working really quickly. And then, I might lighten that way up, add another layer. And then sometimes I even reverse it, flip it horizontal.
Sure. That's great.
Right.
I do that all the time. And suddenly it looks great. And then I flip it and I'm like, oh no, this is horrible. And were you about to start inking this, Mike? "Quote, unquote, inking this digitally?" Or
No, I'm thinking of,
this would be the tighter the next stage is just tighter?
yeah.
That's great.
How are we doing on time?
Well, a little over, but I'm hypnotized. So, but there's a mad flicker that's occurring. I'm not if the audience is seeing that as well. I'm seeing it on this end. I'm not sure if that's just on the kind of the back end broadcast side of things.
Hmm.
But if you want to share this to your Instagram, uh, Draw Manly, that'd be awesome. But let me see if there's any other questions from the community. We had one other one. It was a Ternitine asked us a little early on. It was a little outside the brief, but do you think today's publishing world work ethic has changed? Because he was asking, King Kirby and the 3-pager guys needed to be that fast. It was demanded of them. Do you think that the work ethic has changed? And if so, for what reasons?
I do think, well, people make more money per page in a way than the guys did back in the day. But the other thing is that, I mean, it's all conditional. I mean, if you're doing storyboards, you got to produce a lot of drawings in about 4 weeks. You got 2 weeks to do your rough, and then 2 weeks you usually do your finished. If you're doing a comic, you're doing a Marvel or DC, you're doing a monthly comic. I think the demands are pretty much the same. The difference is that your process of delivery has changed as far as like, if I'd done the Phantom 20 years ago, I would have been mailing it, right? I'm not going to be mailing it these days, so it's all subject to also to change, like what the what the the deadline is for the publisher.
Right. So it's not the work ethic. It's more like what's demanded of creators.
Yeah, I mean, I think my work ethic was developed because when I came into the business, if you wanted to draw a monthly book, you had to be able to produce a certain amount of pages a day, a certain amount of pages a week. And if you could not do that, then you get one issue every once in a while, but you would never get a monthly book. My desire was to be like, Buscema and Kane and Romita and all the peoples I admired who did monthly books. I didn't want to just do one book every 3 months. Now, again, that was my personal choice.
Mm.
There's a lot of people who don't want to work that hard. You know, they would never want to work that hard. So
Well, I think we're looking at an upcoming episode looking at Kickstarters. Is that something folks would be interested in? If you have thoughts on that, let me know in the chat, because it's something that people keep mentioning, and we've touched on it a little bit, and it is something I've got some experience with, and thought maybe it could help answer some questions and help people, I don't know, decide whether or not crowdfunding is right for them, and share some experiences, huge mistakes I've made, things like that. Explain things like ways of discounted shipping and maybe even printer suggestions. There's a ton out there.
do you take out that insurance on your books? You know, like when you get them, if you're getting it printed overseas and you're having it shipped here, do you?
Most if it's the printer will usually insure the material coming over. I mean, it's up to them. There are certain ways that you can ship that the manufacturer won't insure it, like Ingram Spark, for instance. If you ship it the cheapest method possible, they will not insure it for damages. But if you use standard ground shipping, they will insure it. They'll replace books that are damaged. If I'm shipping things out, depending on the price tag of the item, I will include include insurance for sure, and I'll include the price of the postage as well in that insurance price. But for the most part, if you ship certain classes at certain kinds of shipping, especially the U.S. Postal Service, they will include $100 worth of insurance with it. So you don't have to think about it too much. It's really if it's occasionally someone who's backing a Kickstarter will. I rarely have anything over $100 on my Kickstarters, but sometimes people will add a ton of add-ons. They'll basically double the order. I'm shipping one of those out tomorrow. That definitely gets insured. And then it's things that go overseas. I'm not insuring it because of the value of what I'm mailing them per se, but for the value of the cost of the shipping. So if it gets lost, I'm not out the $25 it cost me to ship the thing. Tim, hello. Tim Fielder on Facebook tells you, Mike, fantastic drawing.
Thanks, Tim.
And Ingram, he says, Ingram is awesome. I love the simplicity of the process. I think they're great too. I wish they would use better boxes and not, and just for hardcovers. I haven't done a lot of soft cover work with them. I just wish their hardcover shipping was a bit more insulated. I recently used a project from Mixum and a master class in shipping. I'm still reusing the insulation that they included in the boxes, the extra paper and the extra cardboard. I pull all that stuff out and keep it for shipping out my own stuff. And Mixum put everybody else to shame. JRD over on YouTube. Don't get me started on Ingram. I like Ingram. I think they depending on which facility put your books together, you can have a range of results. And some folks interested in the Kickstarter discussion, Mike.
Then make it so, Mr. Conley.
All right. Talking about the process and the work, getting back to that work ethic question, Shelley on YouTube says, in-house made it different, didn't it? We're all independent contractors, not regular employees.
Yeah, I mean, I've never been in-house. I never really wanted to be in-house. Even when I was working in animation, and I was on staff. I was still in Philadelphia. I never wanted to be in-house someplace. Never. That was never my desire to be in-house. Maybe if I had started when I was younger, but the idea of having to spend all that extra money to move to LA and everything at that time, I thought about it, but I just decided that it wasn't for me. I forgot to put his thumb in.
Talking a little bit more about this print on demand, specifically Ingram, Tim Feeler, great point. When one considers the idea that it used to literally cost thousands to do a print run, and now the customer essentially pays for it. I love it. Totally agree, Tim. Totally agree. I wish they had a little more quality control. That's nitpicking, though. That given the magic of what they offer, and given that unlike Mixam, they offer the access to the book market through their system, but their matte finish covers feel like velvet. All nitpicks aside, when I do the third volume of the Middle Age this year, I'm going back to Ingram for that, just so all the books can have that consistent feel. But JRD points out on YouTube, Ingram's interface requires special programs. If you don't have Adobe, it's hard to get PDFs to Ingram specs. Yep. I get that. And each system has their own set of hoops you have to jump through. Ingram has a setup fee. They've got a revision fee. You can avoid those if you join certain trade organizations like the Alliance of Independent Authors. It's like $100 a year to join, and they'll waive all setup and editing fees for Ingram Spark. So if you do 2 books a year, it pays for itself. If you do 3 books a year, you're coming out ahead. There are other professional organizations which will give you which will waive Ingram's setup fees. Mixam doesn't have a setup fee. They also don't require ISBNs, ISBN numbers. But if you buy a single copy from them, it'll cost you like $70. Whereas Ingram, once you pay your setup fee or have it waived if you can, if you want a single copy, it just costs you whatever it costs. It's very inexpensive. Ingram's a bit of a miracle, especially for hardcovers.
So here's where I talk about relating one side to the other. You're always thinking about how one side of the body relates to the other side of the body.
Tim, I could absolutely spend a whole episode talking about Ingram Spark. They're great. They have some features I wish I haven't used yet. Like I think you've just made the entire internet turn their head to one side.
Oh yeah, you're always spinning a drawing. You're always spinning it.
They have I think for $1 a book, you can personalize a single page inside an Ingram Spark book. I've never done that. I've always
personalize it to who? Like
whatever you want to do. You can basically upload a single document and then they'll insert that as the first page of the book. So you could have something unique, dedicated. A person could get a one-off copy of a book unlike any other because that first page would be different. I've always thought, is there a way to do that? Is there a value to that as a Kickstarter, as for Patreon supporters or something? Tim, I'm a Lightning Source, old school. Lightning Source was the precursor to Ingram. Is it still Lightning Source? Do they still operate as Lightning Source? But Ingram is the main company, and they're the ones they'll also allow you to get your book, use them as a conduit into bookstores and wider distribution.
But going back to if I'm thinking about a character, there's a targus that gives you the ear, right? Pit of the neck, you got your collarbones. So I already know then just because of that angle, right? So I'm always, in fact, I would suggest people do stuff like in their sketchbook, do stuff like practice.
And James on YouTube asks, Mike, do you have an art book of your own?
No, I don't have an art book like a how-to draw book. I have a book of my pen and ink drawings.
And we got a question to me on YouTube from Mugen Glider 82. Any questions for a printer that does prints that you've enjoyed working with? There are many. The print, I don't. If I was going to do 11 by 17, there's a company out of Maryland, which I'm a big fan of, called Indigo Ink. They do a great job with that stuff. But it really depends. The price point, it can be very different. There's a lot of different printers that have different paper stock, different special inks you can get. If they're smaller, I tend to make smaller prints now. I like 11 by 17 prints for convention appearances, but I like smaller prints for mailing out because you don't need a larger box. You want it to fit. You want it to be smaller than the book you're shipping, basically. So I like 6 by 9 or smaller prints if I can do it. And last one I used for that was Jack Prints, JAK Prints. Their website used to be a lot more friendly, a lot more intuitive and user friendly, but they did a good job with the last ones I did. So you draw that through line and then you immediately do that coat hanger.
Yeah. Say if I was looking behind someone, right? I still get this. I still feel the front of the body, right?
Well, that's great.
Trapezius. And then the scapula. But I'm always doing this. I'm always feeling around.
That's great, Mike. A huge internet round of applause for the Tower Power, the man of the hour. Too sweet to be sour. The maestro of mark making, Mike Manley. That turned out great, Mike. Will you share this piece on your social?
Sure. Yeah, I'll put it on. I'll put it on my social media.
That's great.
So I guess if you want to take us out, Steve.
Yeah, I'm hypnotized. You can't. It's not just the flashing light that's getting me there. I don't think it's that alone. I think it's it's the drawing. Thank you all for being here. You're all fantastic. Thanks to everyone on Facebook, on the various Facebook pages who are watching along. If you're on Facebook, do hit the heart, the various emoticons, whatever you want, any emotion you're feeling at the moment. And if you're on YouTube, please again hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, vote thumbs up, leave a comment. Those are the sorts of things that will help the algorithms share this with more people. Huge applause for Mike Manley. And do follow Mike on Instagram at Draw Manley, and on Facebook. You can follow his page. And you can find me, Steve Conley, on... I'm still on Twitter, Mike. Gotta get me
I was talking about that. Seems like everybody was going to quit Twitter. And then all of a sudden, everybody said, no, I'm not. There was that week where he was doing all of his hijinks and people were just like, no,
There's still hijinks. And people complaining all the time about it falling apart around them. But it's the last scene in Raiders where or at least when you're being chased by that orb and the temple's falling apart all around you. But you can find me on Instagram at Instagram Steve Conley, and check out my webcomic The Middle Age at middleagecomic.com, and sign up for my next Kickstarter that launches next Wednesday. It's at deathdealing.com. It's a sequel to my role-playing game stuff. So check out deathdealing.com and be notified. But thank you all for being here. Look for this illustration a little bit later on Mike's social. And Mike, we're still in the pandemic. The endemic has not yet started.
Yes, we will be. I think. I think this is just the way life is. So
until when JAMAR comes back, he'll let us know. He'll let us know if it's okay.
We've been out in the real world. He'll come back and tell us, is it safe?
So until then, everybody, be safe out there, and remember to wash those Kirby hands.
See you next week.
And I'm going to figure out how to hit the button.
With a Kirby hand still growing.